What is it that people are seeing? Is it a man? An animal? A myth? Or something else? Are they delusional? Are they lying? Some are pastors. Some are law enforcement. Some are military. If they are delusional liars, why do we trust them to lead us to God? To put people in jail and to protect our way of life? Why are their words and actions good enough for that? But when it comes to experiencing something out of the ordinary, something fascinating, something possibly terrifying, they become a fool, a joke, an idiot. Not here. We are the Big Dog T2B. Welcome to the show. Hello everyone, my name is Jack, and welcome to the Big Dog T2B. As usual, we have the founder of the Big Dog T2B with us, Nathan Bowling. How you doing, Nate?
Well, I'm good, Jack.
Good to hear it. We also have with us tonight my three Labradors, Katie, Gunner, and Indiana. You may hear from them later. They might be snoring. It's also July 3rd, so we may hear a few fireworks in the background. We waited till 10 o'clock local time, so they might calm down a little bit, but this is the country, and people out here are patriotic. Tonight's format is going to be a little different. My wife, Wendy, made contact with someone locally who asked about local lore. During this contact, Wendy and this young lady had an exchange. So we're going to talk a little bit about the local lore, the state of Alabama, and we're going to focus in on the area of Lacys Springs. Some of the local terms that I remember from South Alabama growing up with was booger, haint, and catamount. Other local names, no heads, the long-standing lore of the Alabama white thing. And then there's Nate. Nate has been involved with Bigfoot since he was a young man. If you want to hear about his first sighting, go back in and review the podcast Nate Story. It was actually within about 2 miles of a little local restaurant called Top of the Mountain. Nate's been on several other podcasts. That's actually where I decided to reach out and contact Nate, as I heard him on another podcast, where he talked about his story with the Malones. We've alluded to the Malones and what happened at the Malones several times, but that is a local story, and maybe we can get Nate to talk a little bit about that one.
The Malones was a very interesting situation. It was really the first situation that I had really dived into this deep. It was a situation where a young lady had a child, and she was breastfeeding, she was lactating, and I have always heard that this made a difference, that this was an attraction for them. Didn't really until then have any fact, this was not fact based on anything other than theory as far as I was concerned, but I did see this. These people, the husband, he runs a mechanic shop here in Lacys Springs, and he's got a really good business, and he would go and buy things at trade days, yard sales, et cetera. He'd bring them home, and his wife and his daughter would spend hours going through this stuff and get on Amazon, YouTube, on the internet, basically, figure out what this stuff is worth, market it, sell it. So my wife got to going up and helping them do this, and they started hearing things moving around in the woods, and they decided that hey, somebody is checking out our stuff. They're going to try to rob us. Well, my wife has had her own encounters, so she's pretty well decided what she thinks it is. She comes home and tells me that, hey, I think they've got Bigfoots at Max. So she said, should I tell them? I said, well, no, they probably won't believe you. So I said, let's wait till they see one. Well, this rocked on a couple of weeks, I guess, and finally they saw one. So the daughter saw it, and I had them to had her draw me a picture of it, and she drew me what looked like a little chubby kid with hair all over it. So that's probably a juvenile. She caught it walking down the driveway, and their driveway dead ends at their house and then goes straight on into a pine thicket. And this rocked on there for a few months. It got to the point that they were really making a nuisance of themselves. The daughter was cleaning out her car, and she sensed that something was watching her, and she turned around and put a flashlight right in one's face at 10 feet. Right behind her, it was sitting in some tall weeds, had the weeds parted back, squatting down and looking at her right there. I mean, it was close enough. It could have pretty much done what it wanted to do. And I went up there and I had talked with Kumbo about tactics and techniques to get them to move on, and along with some of my own, that we eventually got them to pretty much move on. The girl stopped, she stopped lactating, she stopped breastfeeding, and at the end, when all this came together, I'm not sure what it was, but they pretty well moved on. Now, this particular group, at this time, I had heard all about the type 1s, type 2s, type 3s, type 4s, and what everybody said, and I heard what they said, but at the time, I had never experienced anything but a basic type 1. But these that were at the Malones, unlike the ones in Newsom Sinks that I have been dealing with for years, these Malones had a very baboonish looking face, where the ones in Newsom Sinks had a very human looking face. I had good enough thermal that I saw this pretty clear that the baboonish muzzle and possibly canines, and these appeared to be much more aggressive. They made much more of a nuisance out of themselves than the others. The only experience I've ever had with them is basic curiosity. I've never had any kind of threatening behavior of any kind with them. These, we had a couple different. In fact, me and my wife had an issue across the road from my house. And each night, you could hear these things. About 11 o'clock, they would start moving. And it's probably a half a mile as the crow flies from my house to Max's. And you could hear the dogs at each house up through there light off as they would pass through the woods behind these houses. And we found where they would cross under the road in a culvert that was quite a pretty large culvert, which explains why nobody was seeing them across the road. And about 3 in the morning, you could hear them making their way back. Same pattern in reverse. These dogs would, but it was pretty well the same process in reverse. As they would move back to this particular, where I felt like they were pretty well staying. And this one night, me and Kathy went across the road, and we had a issue where we had a vocalization, a tree falls, then we have two to our left, spaced out probably 30 feet apart, and they start moving quietly. Of course, in a pine thicket, you can hear them move from time to time, but they're quiet, moving back the way we come in. So I told Kathy, I said, we need to move out of here. We need to ease out of here now. And she had never really heard that sense of urgency in my voice. She almost broke and run. And I told her, I said, don't you do it. I said, best place for you is right here with me. And we made our way back out. And as we broke out in the yard, the TK Scout, that most of those thermals that's on our website, and most of those were taken with a TK Scout, and it was new to us. So I turned around as soon as we came out of the woods and started snapping pictures. So they're still shots. They're not video. But there's one where it's quartering away, and Jack done a little math on it. That creature was roughly 10 feet behind me. So I think, to my way of thinking, at that time, they were basically up to no good. They had ill intentions towards us. And that is really the first time that I've had that sort of thing happen.
All right, so I got a couple of questions.
Okay.
The reason for this show is the question from the young lady, and we'll go into in a few minutes what she said she's experiencing. So if we use top of the mountain, because she would know where top of the mountain is, you're citing your first one, Nate's story, that occurred about 2 miles east of top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And you live about 2 miles west, mile and a half west of top of the mountain. And then are the Malones farther?
They're basically a half a mile north from me. So, yeah, they would be slightly further. It's basically a straight up Pine Ridge toward the highway from my house.
So is that up Apple Grove Road, up that way?
That is... No.
Well, I have to say specifics.
No, that is straight across the Union Hill Road there.
Mm-hmm.
For Apple Grove Road, you would turn left on Union Hill Road. To go to the Malones, you go straight across, like you're going to the highway.
So when you say that the creatures at the Malones were making a nuisance of themselves, how were they making a nuisance of themselves?
Vocalizations, crowding, throwing things quite a bit. Fact of the matter, this is the first place that I ever really experienced infrasound.
Okay.
The Malones, they go to Gulf Shores every year, and this particular year, because of the goings on, Kathy and I agreed to take care of their dogs, and Kathy would go up in the daytime and take care of them, but I wouldn't let her go by herself at night. Well, this particular night, she got there just a minute or two before I did, and when I pulled up, they were throwing things, and small things, not really, not rocks and whatnot, but there's not a lot of rocks there. And Kathy got physically sick. And this is the second time that I've heard this sound, but the first time I ever had it really affect anybody. But you could hear and I talked with Kumbo about this, and he said a juvenile, when it's trying to perfect its infrasound, sometimes you can hear it. But it sounded like a real low cat purring. And Kathy got physically sick and stayed physically sick the whole time we were there until we got back home. And then she got over it. So I am assuming that was infrasound. And during this same time, Leslie, and I can say her name because they've done podcasts about this. Leslie, the mother, her mother came over while Kathy was there during the day, and they saw one walk between the trees, back off in the woods there a little piece, and the way the land lays, it's up over a ridge, so where it was at, for them to have been able to see it at all, it had to be in the neighborhood of 9 feet. Because I went down there, had Kathy stand later on that day, had her stand where she was, and I took a broom. And I went down there and I started raising the broom up, and I told her to tell me when you can see as much of this broom as you could see of it as it walked between the trees. And it would have been in the neighborhood of 9 feet. But these things, they would get way too close, throw things. Now, one time they did feel like, they called me and they said that there was one in the crawl space under their house. Well, they've got a deck that's pretty high, around a 5-foot deep above ground pool. And I don't think for a minute that there was one under their house. But when I got there looking to see what I saw, it could have easily been standing at the edge of that deck, and the crawl space under the house was open. So it could have easily been the noise carrying under the house. And how come they heard it? It had got to the point where they used to smoke outside. And it got to the point where they wouldn't go outside and sit on the porch and smoke. They would go to the bathroom, turn the fan on. And they were in the bathroom when they heard what they thought was one under their house. Which I pretty well assured them that it wasn't under their house, but it probably was standing somewhere near the edge of that porch. So the sound of it breathing, and that's what they were hearing, is the breathing, was carrying under the house and into the crawl space.
Mm-hmm. So nothing steps into this world that I'm aware of right now that is born in the neighborhood of 700-800 pounds. That being said, everything comes into the world as its version of an infant in a much smaller version.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the size of the entry into the crawl space?
The size of the entry was probably 4 foot by 2.5 high.
Okay.
Probably 4 feet wide, but the floor itself was probably 3 blocks high, so that's roughly maybe 2.5 feet.
So theoretically, and you know me, I have to say if these things exist because I've never seen one. Highly suspect, but I don't believe. Theoretically, an adult could enter a hole that big. But the standard entry for a crawl space is nowhere near that big.
Right.
Most of them are vent-sized holes.
Mm-hmm.
There may be one entry that most people normally keep sealed up in some way, some type of door that would have to be opened or destroyed in some way, taken off, in order to get anything sizable into a crawl space. And that's why those things exist, because you don't want raccoons under your house, possums under your house, whatever under your house. You don't want that. So they thought that something was working their way in into the crawl space.
Into the crawl space, yes.
Okay. There are other stories out there across the nation of that same thing. Any mammal, particularly when it is alone, threatened, or pressured, the natural behavior of that animal is one, flight, just to leave, run away.
Mm-hmm.
Another natural behavior of that type of animal is to seek solace somewhere in some version of something of a den where it can only be aggressed from one entry point. So crawl space would make sense in that. However, most animals, unless it's comfortable, very comfortable, it's in a home range, it has an established thing, it knows how far back a space goes, and it's been there before. If it feels threatened or detected or anything like that, it's not going to run into an enclosed space unless it's hurt.
Right.
So that's kind of those behaviors. Now, there's another lady, for reference. She is about 3 miles east of the little top of the mountain restaurant. And she has a grandson that's been incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about her report?
The early one or the latest?
Let's do both.
Okay. This lady, along about the time that I had my first encounter, they lived not where she lives now, but over on a place called a place called Brazos Chapel, which is basically
So how far is Brazos Chapel from top of the mountain?
probably 5 miles. But what it is, Greenbrier Cove, where I had my first encounter, right, along the Tennessee River, there's a series of coves. And when you cross over this ridge at Brazos Chapel, you drop off into Parch's Cove. They had a place at Brazos Chapel that basically separated Greenbrier from Parch's Cove. She's got kids that's roughly my age. There was a pond on the property. They would go play by this pond. And they came running to the house one afternoon, told her, Mama, there's a hairy man at the pond. Well, of course, she didn't believe them. She thinks it's children's imagination, until shortly after that, I'm not sure exactly the time frame, they had just moved in this place. Her washing machine was on the front porch hooked to the water hose. And she would go out and wash clothes on the front porch, and she was putting in a load of clothes. She heard something coming down the driveway. She looks up, and there is a white, hairy, gargantuan man walking down her driveway, was the way she explained it. And she was afraid to try to make it back in the house. She's afraid to see it, so she just squatted down beside the washing machine. And she watched it come down her driveway, right beside her porch, close enough that she saw its face, and walked on by her house into the woods. And this went on for some time. She would see them come over this hill, down to that pond, and back. And she said sometimes she would see one, sometimes two. Said she would see this big white one and a darker colored one that was considerably smaller. They would come down to this pond, they would stay a while, they would go back. And I'm thoroughly convinced that the white one was the one that I saw in my initial sighting, my initial encounter. Because what I experienced the night before I saw this white one, was a much more belligerent, much more aggressive creature. The white one that I saw was not aggressive. He was not threatening in any way. The one the night before was, but we never really saw it. So I am thoroughly convinced that what this lady saw was the one that I saw. But the whole white Bigfoot thing in this area, and when I say this area, I mean from central Alabama up through Bankhead Forest, up into Limestone County, all the way across into Jackson County, down through DeKalb, the white creatures are commonplace. Fact of the matter, the first one that my wife saw was across the road from my house, standing beside this old barn. And if you followed our show, you've heard me talk about this old barn lots of times. But it was standing there with one hand up on the side of the barn, standing there watching her. And she said it was either gray or white. She saw it at night, but she said you could see the entire outline because it was a light color in the moonlight. So, and that goes back even to, let's see, Harlan is 70, my uncle. Jackie Brown is same age. So this is before Jackie was born. They were born in 1950. So I'm going to say 40s, 30s. Jackie had an uncle who had a sawmill across the road from where he's got a junkyard now. And he saw, and they call it the white thing, but he saw the white thing came up out of what is now Dry Creek Cove, come up the side of the mountain, and was plundering around out at the sawmill, and his uncle shot it. And I'm assuming probably with a .22 or maybe a shotgun, because that was the common firearm for people back then. But he shot this creature several times, and he said it would swat where it hit him, like it was swatting insects, and said it never slowed down. It just ran off. So this is something that has been commonplace in this area for, that could have been late 30s, 40s. It was before Harlan and Jackie were born. So, this is nothing new here.
So this is the first thing that happened to this now elderly woman.
Mm-hmm.
And right before I moved here from Maryland,
Mm-hmm.
you told me that she had contacted you because you have a little influence.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about that?
About the slap inside the house?
Yeah.
Yeah. The grandson, there's something slapped inside the house. She's assuming when she first hears it that it is his friends coming knocking on the side of the house, wanting him to come out and go do what they do. So it got to the point where her and her daughter were noticing that it was knocking pictures off the wall when it was slapped the side of the house. Now, you can easily travel from where her house is to Greenbrier, to Brazier's Chapel, to Jack's house, to any of these places without crossing the road, other than the Union Grove Road.
Mm-hmm. So it being obnoxious there was slapping the house.
Right.
And she thought that, and her having seen one, her mind didn't jump to that.
Right.
Her mind jumped to
My grandson's no good friends.
Just pilfering around the house, slapping the house,
Mm-hmm.
wanting him to come outside.
Right.
So let's jump from that, and this will become evident once I tell you what's going on with this young lady. Why I'm jumping to this. After retiring from the Navy, I moved to Maryland. What the place looked like, Nate?
Well, basically, old farm. I mean, it had a milking barn that would set. Okay, up there I'm a little directionally impaired.
House facing north.
The house facing north. But if the house facing north, the milking barn would have been to the west, probably 75 yards.
About that.
With a growed up area between the house and the milking barn, with a ginormous field behind it, a scope of woods across the road. Back on to the west of the milking barn, there was like wetlands, like a creek basin. And I'm working off one-time memory. Across the road, there was a hedge, and you went through this open space into a pretty good-sized field. Now, when I looked at it, it was when I really went over there, it was at night, so I'm not really sure how big that field was, but it appeared to be a pretty big field. And what is it, 400 yards to the house up on the corner?
Better than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then behind there, what, a quarter of a mile?
Now it's 250 yards up to the house at the stop sign.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And then half mile.
To what? To the one behind?
To the one to the west, yeah.
Yeah.
What was the terrain like?
Well, it was open field behind you. It was probably the same 250 yards to that tree line to the east. And the best I remember, that was a pretty thin tree line, the way it come up between the other road and the edge of the field. Across the road was pretty heavily wooded back to from straight in front of the house to the west, and then further north. Then there was that spot where you go into that other field, and that was probably 30 yards, thick little scope of trees.
Thick, nasty.
Yeah.
Scrub nasty, take the hide off you kind of stuff. So the house sat in the middle of 61 acres. The house sat vacant quite a while. We rented the house for a long time. Now, we had water. We had change in elevation. We had that's elevation in land. We had a combination of open fields and dense vegetation. And when we moved in there, things started relatively quickly, and they weren't violent. They were more obnoxious, where the first one was rock throwing. You can go back and hear a little bit about that one. Maybe we'll do a show sometime about my little stint in Maryland. House slapping, rummaging around, and the people there, for it to be Maryland, a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about Maryland. It is a very liberal state because of 2, maybe 3 cities. Everywhere else is rural farmland. And I asked one of the local sheriffs there, if they ever have a problem with vagrants or people cooking drugs in the woods. That's relatively common in some areas. And he said, no, people around here shoot you. I said, awesome, I fit right in. So there wasn't an issue with, vagrants and people just kind of roaming around the woods. And I contacted all the neighbors. I said, here's my number. I'm a pretty decent carpenter, plumber, electrician, animal husbandry, first aid medic. I'm good with all these things. Here's my number. If you need me, call me. It doesn't matter when. I'll be there. Please don't just show up, because you may not see it, but there'll be a gun there somewhere, and that's just who I am. So all of them knew not to mess with me, but that I was good people. And I held up to that word. They had a few of them call me, hey, Jack, I don't know what's going on with my horse, okay? Hey, I don't know what's going on. Hey, so-and-so's cut pretty bad. Okay, and I show up. So this stuff happens there. It would go in sprees, where initially it was pretty regular and pretty significant. And I think it may have been because we've talked about this on the show before, that us moving in upset the routine. The house was vacant, standing vacant for a considerable time. The house was remodeled. It was vacant long enough that there was a full spinal column and rib cage of a cow within about 50 feet of the house in that scrub. So the house had to be vacant long enough for the cow to fall and decompose, because nobody's going to leave a carcass like that in the way that it's going to off-gas around their house like that, particularly not that close. That's just not doable. That's bad. It sat vacant for a considerable amount of time, and in that time, if these things exist, they may have established a routine, and when we moved in, we disturbed that routine. And then things calmed down after about 6 months to a year, where it wasn't so frequent. It wasn't all the time. And then it became something like 2 to 4 days on, and anywhere from 3 weeks to 6 weeks off. And I've said before, it would stop long enough, and it would just absolutely positively stop to the point to where I would get to the point of, hey, did I imagine all of that? And then something new would happen that would just kind of, there's no way that I can blame that on anything other than a human with superhuman strength, agility, ability to go through the terrain that's that nasty at the rate that it does, all the different calls and eye shine and just all the just plethora of stuff. So now to move on to this young lady. She is new to the home. She has a deck that is a considerable height above ground. And she reached out and said, hey, does anybody know anything about local lore? And I'm a numbers guy, and I start figuring the odds. And basically what she has going on, what she conveyed, is that something started pilfering around the home. Now, that's not uncommon. Dogs will do it. Bears will do it. We've spotted a couple of cougars, panthers, mountain lions, whatever you want to call them. We spotted one of those around here recently. Those animals have a particular behavior set. And anything that's going to come in and pilfer around that's sizable, and raccoons do it, and you'd be really surprised the noise that a raccoon can make when it starts knocking around stuff, and it's at night and there's not any other real noises associated with something, and something's leaning up against something and they bump into it and it falls. It's not necessarily that they picked up something and it fell or they threw it. It's just something was there and it was precarious enough that they were able to bump it, climb on it, walk behind it, and push it off of something. They're just very large cats in the way that they climb and move around and knock stuff around, and that's the thing. And there are bears in the area. Mm-hmm. They're not extremely common. They are out right now. The young are weaning. The young are relatively sizable now. But bears have particular behaviors, and it's generally one of three things. One, it's going to ignore you, and it's going to go back to what it was doing. Two, more times than not, it's going to see you, and it'll turn around and move straight away from you. Three, it's going to come see you. So in this thing of what's going on, and I think this was a singular occurrence so far, may be mistaken, this is what's being relayed to me from my wife, is that there's a deck, and the deck is a sizable, it's considerable height off the ground. Something is out there, and it's making noise, and it's pilfering around, and they step out, or she steps out to see what's going on, and this is where the behavioral thing comes in of, I believe it moved toward her under the deck, and at that point, it sounded like it was trying to get under the house and into the crawl space. So that is not bear behavior. If it was sizable, if it was more than, let's say, 30 pounds, and it moved toward her instead of away from her, the only way that I could sponsor that and say, hey, this would be a normal behavior, is if the animal had already taken up residence there and already had a den under the house in the crawl space, which they should have heard it before, because I don't think this was within a couple of days of moving in. It may have been. Then, okay, you come out, startle me, I'm going to run back in the den and do that. And I don't know how long the house was vacant before she moved in. The longer that the house is vacant and the longer they have to set a normal that you move into the house and disturb, then the more significant their sense of ownership, doesn't matter the animal, the more of their sense of ownership is going to kick in, and the more significant the response will be. Did I say that the right way?
You did.
Okay. So, basis of the show is there's been some indirect contact. There's a young lady and her husband, and she has a suspicion. The husband is
skeptical, to say the least,
which is normal. And I don't believe that he's our age, 50s, 60s. Accepting something like that into your reality or possible reality is a hardcore jolt to ego, which is what makes men attractive. It's what they live on. It's what gives them confidence to take action. All of these things. So accepting something like that is tough, right? Particularly for men
who are men.
Men who are men, and because then they have to accept into their reality that there's possibly something out there that they might have a problem dealing with.
Well, Max Malone, for instance, lived through all that, experienced all this through his wife and daughter, and still refuses to believe it. He would not even come outside because he's afraid of what he's going to see.
Mm-hmm.
And Max is that hunter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you hear people all the time say, "Oh, I do this. I hunt the whole hunt." He does hunt almost every day hunting season.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if he accepts this, he's got to rethink everything he does.
I wouldn't call it fear. I would say reluctance. They have their box and they operate in their box, and this thing hasn't, for them, intruded into their box. So they're going to do what guys typically do, which is it's not a problem until it makes itself a problem. And I'm not going to go looking for the problem because I don't necessarily want to have to deal with that problem. If the problem presents itself, I'll deal with that decisively. But I'm not going to go looking for that problem. So it was kind of an odd thing in the way that Wendy described their interaction, which has been via some chat program, that she just started checking blocks. Hey, just moved into the house. Hey, something pilfering around. Hey, it's close. It's obnoxious. It's on my floors. It's making its presence known. And, you know, we never did the whole escalation of force show that you've been after me to do. But these are standard expressions of force and the escalation of force. And these things, in 99.99% of all of the accounts that I've listened to, and I've listened to a lot of them, these things are big on the bluff. They like to make noise. They like to crowd you. They like to try and intimidate you. They want to make you feel uncomfortable. It's the same thing that you might do with an unwanted house guest. That you're not going to walk up and put your hands on them and throw them out the door. You're just going to try and make the living conditions uncomfortable enough that they just want to get up and leave. So, and that's pretty much the scenario that happened with me in Maryland. I'm not that guy. Nate will tell you it kind of bothers him sometimes that I just don't react. Nate gets amped up. He wants to go. Me, I am generally, you know, that pond water guy, and I stay that way until things go bad. Fortunately, with me and Nate together, hadn't gotten to that point yet. Gotten close a couple of times, but hasn't gotten to that point. But they don't want the physical conflict. No animal out there. There are only a few animals in North America that will go seek out the physical conflict. Number one is moose. We don't have moose around here. They'll seek out the physical conflict. More people are killed by moose, I believe, than any other animal in North America. Grizzly, brown bear, Kodiak, all the same bear. They'll make little bears if you put them together. They'll come see you. They'll come see you because they're just that big, and that's who they are. They're a tank on 4 feet. They know it, and because of that, they don't have a problem expressing that. However, at the same time, there's plenty of videos of people damn near within arm's reach of them, and they just don't care. To them, you're nothing but navel lint. And you shift from navel lint to a threat or from navel lint to food, then things change. Panthers, cougars, mountain lions. More times than not, if you see one during the day, that's bad because it's hungry. They don't move in the day unless they're extremely hungry or they have to.
Something's made them move.
Yep, something's driven them onto their feet. But even if you see them during the day, more times than not, it has to do with that whole nonverbal communication thing. Your eyes are higher than theirs are, and because of that, they see you differently. They have to get up that high, and they have to bring you down to their level, and that's too much effort. So, very few things out there. Black bears look at you, 99 times out of 100 are going to look at you and turn around and move in the other direction. Very seldom do they come see you, unless they're conditioned to something like a park, where they're going to come and say, ooh, that's food, I can come snatch that, or they're dumpster diving in a park somewhere. And
truth of the matter, most black bear encounters that end in a bad way are predatory encounters, or predatory attacks.
Or between sow and cubs.
Yeah, or between sow and cubs, because it's rule of thumb, if you're attacked by a grizzly, play dead. If you're attacked by a black bear, fight back, because he intends to eat you.
So these are the behaviors and the animals that are native to this area. You got black bear. You've got, they won't say they're native. Anything that you see around here, Alabama's DNR position is that they are transitory. They are moving from one region to another, that Alabama is not their home. However, we've seen many tracks, and we've actually seen a couple of cats. So they exist. Bobcats are around, not a real formidable animal. Again, they're looking way up at you. They don't like that thing. To them, you appear very much bigger and very much stronger than they are. They're not after that. Raccoons, not a predatory animal, but are prone to approaching humans. They're conditioned that garbage is good. There's a slang term for raccoons. It's called a trash panda, and they earn that name. So anything moving to you without the intention of harming you is not in keeping with any real known behavior of any mammal in North America other than humans. So that in the report of she's out and it's out there somewhere and it moves more under the deck and slips inside. Now, if it could turn out to be a raccoon, and you could have some raccoons under your house, and it could have slipped under there and rattled some stuff around, hit a pipe. If you want a disturbing noise inside your home, and your home is off the ground, you have a crawl space, go in there and slap a spill line and listen to that hum and rattle through your house. That will make a very obnoxious, disturbing noise.
And there's also the fact that none of these that you've named off, if you go outside and they're there, they don't hide from you. They don't make an effort not to be seen. They're either like, oh crap, I gotta go.
They're not going to move to you to hide.
Right. The nature of hiding is more human than animal. And the more I deal with these things, they definitely have human qualities. Now, you were talking about a man's box. And you know what my box is.
Mm-hmm.
My box, these things are primates. They eat, they sleep, they breathe, they crap, they procreate, and they can die. I do not get into the whole woo thing, not discrediting anything that anybody says along those lines. It's just, I have not seen that, so I choose, my comfort zone is choosing not to go that route. Because you get into stuff like that, then that's something that I may not be able to deal with. So I choose to believe that, yes, these are things that I can deal with, and that's where I'm going to stay till something moves me from that.
So there's the lore of Bigfoot, and the local lore predates the term Bigfoot, predates the term Sasquatch. Boogers hates catamounts. You get out toward Coombo's place up there on the Tennessee, a little bit west here, North Bankhead. The local lore is prevalent enough that there's a road there, no head. No head is one of the local terms, because looking at them from the back, the locals, it's leaned forward, its head is more down in between its shoulders, so looking at it from the back, it looks like a person primarily with no head, just a stump of a neck, but what you're looking at is the back of the head, the top back of the head. So the local lore, and this is just Nate, his family, and what happens. Nate was born here, grew up here. If you know Lacys Spring, Fuel City, Nate used to walk up to Fuel City when he was a kid. There's a creek that runs through the property out there. It's got his family name on it. You look it up on Google. This is just Nate and his family, and within top of the mountain if you drew a circle from the little top of the mountain restaurant right there of what, 6 miles?
Yeah.
If you drew a circle using top of the mountain as a center, all this stuff has occurred within 6 miles. I had some odd stuff go on here one night. The guy next door's got goats. He's got Great Pyrenees in his yard. The Great Pyrenees has killed several of the local dogs, including a pit, that have decided to get in the fence with the goats, and that's bad to do with the Great Pyrenees. And I'm sitting out back one night, and the goats start bleating, just blah, 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 just distress calling bleats, not, hey, I want to eat, hey, what are you doing? It was, hey, I'm worried. And they're shooting from one end of the pasture, the other end of the pasture, across the pasture, back and forth. And then, the dog's lights off. And I'm listening, and I'm sitting behind the house on our back deck, and so I grab my flashlight, and Nate calls him. I argue with the son, 5-pound flashlight. It'll shine a mile. And I went inside and stepped outside in the driveway and walked down the driveway a little bit, because that's where I get to this guy's house. And as I do, I shine around and over across the street. The house faces almost due west. So I shine out across the street, and there are a couple of lone sporadic trees in a grown up field, and I caught eye shine and went over and checked it next day. That sounds like my dog's got the hiccups. So the next day, I walk over there, and where I had the eye shine, the eyes would have been I'm about 6 feet. The eye shine would have been about a foot over my head, and would have been about a foot lower than the lowest branch on this little scrub tree that's over there. But I shine over there, and about that time, the dog with the goats gets a lot more animated. And I was about to walk over to old boy's house, and I heard him yell at the dog, "Get him, get him, get him." So I'm armed, I got my flashlight, and I trot over there, and he was worried that his dog, his male, he had just gotten a new female puppy. I say puppy, she was probably about 6 months old at the time. He was worried that his male had gotten out of the fence and went after whatever it was that was pestering these goats, because we're looking in the field as we're going around the property, and we're not seeing the dog. We saw the little female. She was there, and she was bent. She was not happy. And he had seen a couple of other dogs there when he pulled up. He had just pulled up in the driveway. I just found out. So in between the time of me stepping in the house, he pulled in the driveway. I step out, shine around, and catch this eye shine. I hear the dog get a lot more animated. I hear him yell at the dog. We start around the property. We see the female puppy. And the male's nowhere to be found. And we're looking for the male. And I'm looking at the stuff on the other side of the road from this pasture, and I'm trying to find some knocked down weeds from where the dog or whatever dog's after dove into the woods. I'm not seeing that. So, and he's calling the dog. Dog's not coming. He's worried about the dogs. Had a dog for a long time. It's a good dog. Protects his property. It's an asset. So we go back in the property, and the little female is now very satisfied with herself. She's up, her tail's wagging. She's, doing the, hey, I did a good job thing. And we go to the barn and flip the lights on in the barn, and this very large Great Pyrenees that kills coyotes pretty regular, kills other dogs, killed a pit, keeps these goats safe, has this female and whatever these other two dogs were that were out there, and something's chasing these goats around in that pasture. This Great Pyrenees male, big dog, you've seen him.
Mm-hmm.
He stands up, his head comes up just under my chin.
Mm-hmm.
And he's decided it was a good idea to go down and lay down in the barn in the dark.
That's serious.
That's serious. You back that dog down, you push him in the barn, he's going to go lay down, keep his head down while the master's out there calling him and the goats are raising hell. Something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
something's wrong with that. I didn't tell him about the eye shine across the road. He's not that guy.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, without crossing the road, you can get to the old lady's house that's got the house slapping thing going on. On the other side of the, right across the road, get down in there into Greenbrier, that's where you had that encounter. On the other side of 231 from here, you've had stuff over there and
you know what's it been
in the sinks and over there across the road. That thermal that we have is within those thermal images. Those are
the majority of them.
The majority of them are within 1.5 miles, 2 miles of that little top of the mountain restaurant. So the local lore is yes, it's lore for me. It is absolute positive, 100% reality. No different than me or a cinder block or one of these dogs as far as Nate's view of the world. And maybe that's my thing, right? Of not, I really want to see one because I want to know I haven't lost my mind. But I'm not going to believe until I do that because I don't want to be trapped and say, hey, I believe. I want to know. I've got belief for just a couple of things because belief is faith, you know, acceptance without evidence. And I'm not that guy. There's this book, kind of believe in the book and what the book says, you know, faith. But outside of that, no, I'm a concrete person. So that's local lore for Lacys Springs. And it's local lore from basically one guy and his family. Now, if you go in that and you tie Kumbo into it, because bulk of what Kumbo, Wheeler, when he talks about Wheeler and he talks about his family farm, we're only talking about another 30 miles. And supposedly the range on these things, it could be the same animal or the same troop of animals. Making a circuit covering about a couple of miles a day, working through a habitat, get to another spot, settle down there, do whatever you do in your little spot for this area, gather resources, have some time. Things start getting pressured, you get antsy, get up and move, and make a big circle. And the totality of the circle comes up in somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 miles.
Well, if you think about it, what's it been 3 months ago, we had the guy come to us about down there on the creek where we went down, Kumbo, Jack and I went down and investigated this, and it is very possible we had rocks thrown at us. The only reason we discredit that is they were beaver present. Now, we didn't say there weren't beaver dams, they weren't. And a lot of the sounds we heard sounded like not something slapping the top of the water, but something going into the water, the thump sound. But there's a guy has been run out of there several times. Swears that boogers have run him out of there. He went down there with us the first time, and
he was amped up.
Yeah, he was nervous as part of my language. Dog shit and peach seed. He was not comfortable at all, and Jack and I were heavily armed. You know, that's in this same place. And if you dig, I mean, I could talk, if I could think of every story and everything that I've heard anybody say over my life, if I could sit here and recall all those, we'd be here to daylight. So this is a common thing here, and it's not, you've got people that have moved here, and then you got the people that were born here. All the people that were born here, trust me, they're not going to think you're crazy when you start talking about this. The ones that move in, they might think, yeah, right. But
here's a good one. What about the sign that you ran across out in the middle of nowhere that says, "Don't feed the Sasquatch"?
Yeah.
Handwritten note.
Yeah, don't feed the Sasquatch.
Stapled to a telephone pole.
And then you go up that, you turn on that, what's that road when you go down to the end of when you get to the end of Greenbrier Road in the cove, turns left,
I
something,
forget what.
Bettinger Mountain Road.
I think that's what it is.
Bettinger Mountain Road. About halfway up it, there's a sign that says Bigfoot Crossing. You got the lawyer down there. When he first moved in, he bought like 200 something acres there, and I think the guy has passed away, the lawyer. So I hear. But there's an old man that lived down there, David Couch. Lived there for, I can't remember him not living there. I mean, that's their family farm there. In fact, his wife still lives there, but David's passed. But when this lawyer moved in, David makes his way down there to tell this lawyer to beware, that they're there. And the lawyer's like, yeah, senile old man, until he starts hearing the screams, he finds the tracks. And the last time I spoke with him, he had still never seen one. But he said the best way he could describe it was 2.5 coyotes. Where all three said it looked like something took their back feet and their front feet and pulled them in two. There wasn't a tooth mark, claw mark, cut mark, anything. Looked like they were just ripped in two, and half of one of them was missing. And that goes on to the whole love-hate relationship that some people talk about between a booger and coyotes.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was one of the anomalies in Maryland. And all the stuff that happened in Maryland, anyone who's a hunter, you skin a deer and you skin it down so far, and this is going to get a little bit gross, but you'll understand what I'm saying and why I say it. You skin it down so far, and if you're trophy hunting and you're going to cape it and you keep cutting and cutting and cutting and pulling that skin forward toward the skull, there's a time when you have to separate the skull from the rest of the body.
Right.
That is not a small chore.
No, it's not.
That is a difficult thing. And it was an odd thing there in Maryland after we had some disturbance around the place. I go down past the milk barn, down there to that drainage. And you get down there to the drainage, and it's too soft to get the tractors in there to get hay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little grown up, but at the edge of where they could get to with the tractor, and they're cutting it for hay, there is a skull, upper mandible, no lower mandible, of a yearling deer. Now, the odd part is that it was still wet. The eye sockets were still wet.
So it was recently alive.
Yeah. The nostrils were still wet.
So that head was basically pulled off.
Now, you take a bear and you take the mechanics of doing that. I'm overly clinical. The mechanics of doing that, it would have to stand on its neck and grab a hold of its skull and pull and twist and pull and twist and gnaw and pull and twist and pull and twist. Because I'm telling you, I've been that guy. It is not a small chore to do that when you have tools. Now, the other odd part about this is that you get standard predation, and it's basically, if you took that into our world, would be a crime scene. You got a central crime scene, and then you've got a scatter of debris around the central carcass where the alphas will come in and they'll feed on the carcass, and the subordinates will come in, snatch something, and run off with it 20, 30 yards to get far enough out of the alpha's interest, and they'll sit out there and feed. And if something's got young, it might, take something and just do away with it entirely and go run off to where the den is. But I found this skull, and I'm looking at it, and it doesn't make any sense. So, do the standard thing. Start walking a circle. Farther out, farther out, farther out, farther out, farther out, farther out. There was nothing within 50 yards of that skull, all the way down to the creek drainage. Because once I got down to the creek drainage, I'm walking straight down the creek drainage to get farther out and make the big circle. It became a semicircle to try and find anything else. Now, that's not standard predation.
No.
It's odd. And Wendy, my son that thinks I've lost my mind, they make fun of me because I just use that word odd.
Mm-hmm.
It's odd. That makes no sense. I know what things do. That right there, I can't. Maybe a buzzard got it. Maybe a raptor got it. Started hopping with it. Decided buzzards don't pick things up in their claws and fly off with them. It's not who they are. They pester it in place. Maybe a raptor picked it up.
Mm-hmm.
Flew off with it and dropped it and decided not to come back and eat it. So it decided to leave with it, dropped it, and then it didn't come back. Or maybe it came back, pecked the eyes out of it. I don't know. But animals have certain behavioral patterns. They have primary motivators: eat, sleep, reproduce, and going about satisfying those needs and self-preservation, those things. So going back to the word odd, it was odd as this chat interaction is going on between Wendy and this lady, where she's going down the checkbox of what we have heard from numerous people. Exactly.
Almost every encounter.
Yeah. Just going down the checkbox. Hey, this is what happened. This is my first thing. This is my first thing. This is my first thing. And in the escalation of force thing, the next thing that normally happens.
We got to do that show. Because it's necessary to refer to it a lot.
Yeah.
Sometime this week, we got to put that out.
Yeah. So in the escalation of force thing, the natural escalation of force is physical presence, right?
You see me.
You see me. I'm going to let you see me. I'm going to let you see how big I am, and I'm going to let you know that I'm not intimidated. As a matter of fact, I'm letting you see me with full intent of intimidating you. That is the next natural step in this. And in doing that, that is normally with males. Females, for some reason, there are numerous stories, numerous cases where a woman and child are out by themselves and they might pester them a little bit, but nobody else comes around, harms them. You're not going to come in. You're not going to use a raised tone. You're not going to come in. You're not going to get violent in any way. You're not going to start showing your behind as a male, because if you do, no, this is a female human. This is my female human, and I'm going to run you off. So this natural escalation of force thing is generally directed at a male.
Uh-huh.
So the other things now, with the whole female bit, if a Bigfoot is going to get too close, the reports that I have in the database that say that there's been actual physical contact, that they have reached out and touched them, there's only a couple, 2, 3. But if memory serves, they're all women. They don't have a problem closing ground on women, but it's not closing ground with aggression. It's more, seems to be more curiosity, comfort.
And me and Kathy used to booger together all the time. And I have always had better love when she was with me.
Well, that's the thing in the database. The highest occurrence of number of people, when we look at the data,
3
is 3. And when you look at nonverbal communication and the perception of something, a singular thing, if it's by itself, is apt to be more aggressive versus defensive. It's apt to be desperate if it doesn't have a social support system behind it. And because of that, don't approach it.
Right.
If you have 2, that would mean particularly opposite sex, mated pair. I've been a bouncer most of my life. I'm FLETC trained. I can go through the whole bit. I've worked with law enforcement closely in my military career. If there's one thing you don't want to do is get in the middle of a domestic.
Right.
They can mess with each other all day long. They'll get on you like hyenas. 3 looks to be more of a family group. Unless they're all 3 of equal size. But 3 is the most common number of people present in a sighting. Now, after 3, you get to 4, 5, 6, unless you're talking about a female with a couple of children, which are the only ones that we have in the database. But if you actually take the time to go through and read them, and I read every one of them, have all been women and children.
Mm-hmm.
But if you get to that number and they're all sizable adults, that looks a lot more like a war party. So we're getting up on around about an hour, and that's where we like to keep the show. You got anything you want to say before we close, Nate?
Yeah, I'd like to basically speak directly to the lady that Wendy was talking to. I wouldn't be alarmed about this just yet. You're interacting with Wendy if you need us to come over and have a look. Nobody ever has to know your name, where you live, anything to that effect. These are just things that we can think of for your benefit that might help you along in this situation, because this is commonplace in this area. Anybody else that has an encounter, needs something looked into, contact us. This is what we do. And we'll be happy to, if it's not where we can show up, if it's too far for us to show up, but we both have jobs, we might have a little input that'll help you. And if we don't know, there's always Kumbo.
Next one is physical presence. In between here and physical presence, you might get some rock throwing. You might get some tree breaks, damage. You might get some nonverbal. Start hearing howls, screams, growls, huffs, that kind of thing. And we're not crackpot people. You can go to our website, www.bigdogt2b, and if you were to reach out to us and you'd say it's time for that interaction to be over, that interaction is over until you call us again. We are not nuisance folks, and we're very personable. We're very supportive. You're not crazy, at least not any more crazy than I am.
And the thing about it, if you need us, you call us, we come.
Yeah. We're in the Lacys Spring area. Nate, the Malones called him, and he jumped on the four-wheeler, and they pointed to where this thing had crawled up in the high grass close to the daughter, and actually Nate showed up on the four-wheeler within about 4 minutes and drove straight into where this thing was, found out that there was actually a wallow back there that had actually been back there for a long time. And they don't have that problem anymore. Nate fixed that problem. We're not going to say how it was fixed, because it could have the opposite reaction if not done properly.
Right. Could be dangerous if you don't. And when you use that technique, you got to be willing to go the distance.
Yeah. Anyway, that's our 2 cents. That's
for what it's worth.
For what it's worth. And I thought of another 4 or 5 incidents that happened within that 5-6 mile radius of top of the mountain up here, this little restaurant, that absolutely positively these are the locals. And these people aren't crackpot people. A lot of them are outdoorsmen. They're older folks. They're farm folks. They've gone out. They've had to deal with birth and death and working a farm. They're matter-of-fact people. And they're not prone to flights of fancy. They might not have a college degree, a PhD or something like that, but I guarantee you they can get along just fine without all of those people. They'll go out and make a living in that country just as well as anything else. So, in closing, as always, if you decide to step off the pavement, if you decide to step off the trail and get back into places that people normally don't go, you need to be mentally, physically, and emotionally prepared for what you may encounter. Take care. God bless. We love you. And until next time, have a great day.